What if I told you that a group of MIT students turned blackjack into a science and made millions of dollars from casinos? Sounds like a dream, right? Well, it's not. Stick with me to the end, and I'll show you how they did it. And more importantly, why it almost cost them everything. This is a story about gambling, genius, and a little bit of luck. But mostly, it's about being really clever. These students took on the most powerful casinos in the world and won big. But there's a catch, and it's huge. More on that in just a bit, but trust me, you won't want to miss it. Okay, let's break it down. Imagine you're a group of MIT students. You're brilliant, you're ambitious, and you decide to try something wild. Making money using one of the most well-known casino games in the world, blackjack. But here's the twist. You don't rely on luck. You rely on math, teamwork, and some serious strategy. And that, my friends, is exactly what these students did. You see, they didn't just play the game. They broke it down, figured out the odds, and then turned those odds in their favor. They turned blackjack into a science. Sounds simple, right? Well, the execution is what's jaw-dropping. So how did they do it? Stay with me, because this story is about to get wild. Step 1. The strategy. Now, let's rewind to the beginning. MIT, known for producing some of the brightest minds in the world, wasn't just cranking out future engineers and scientists. No, this time, a small group of students came together to change the game in Las Vegas. Literally. At the center of it all was their leader, Mr. M, a professor with an obsession. But this wasn't just any professor. He was a genius who knew that when it came to blackjack, it wasn't about luck. It was about numbers. It was about strategy. And most importantly, it was about teamwork. Mr. M wasn't interested in just teaching his students basic card counting. He wanted to teach them something far more advanced. He wanted to help them figure out a way to take control of the game, using logic, mathematics, and psychological tactics. The key to this team's success was the creation of a complex system that involved multiple roles. There were big players, who would enter the casino and place large bets when the odds were in their favor. These were the players that would grab the attention of casino security. But they weren't working alone. The real magic happened with the counters, who would be on the sidelines, calculating the remaining cards and feeding information to the big players through subtle signals. This wasn't just card counting, it was coordinated team play that allowed the MIT team to manipulate the game in ways that most people didn't even know were possible. But as clever as it wasn't foolproof. So how did they manage to avoid being detected? Well, that's where their real brilliance came in. They didn't just play in the same casino day after day. No, they moved around constantly, city to city, country to country. Their strategy was to make sure that no casino could track their movements long enough to figure out what they were doing. They flew under the radar, always staying one step ahead of the casino security teams. But here's the thing. While this system worked for a while, it wouldn't last forever. The MIT team knew this. They knew that their luck, and their secrecy, would eventually run out. And that's where the story starts to get interesting. As the team moved from one casino to the next, they began to win more and more. Their method was brilliant, but casinos are no strangers to smart players. The question was, would they get caught? Step 2. The execution. Let's take a deeper look at the execution of their plan. This wasn't a simple hustle. It was a well-organized operation with an intricate system in place. Each team member had a specific role, and every move had to be executed with precision for the plan to work. One mistake could blow their cover and end their lucrative casino run. The counters were the backbone of the operation. They were responsible for tracking the cards, analyzing the deck, and figuring out when the odds were in their favor. They were the ones who made the key calculations that would dictate when it was time for the big players to make their move. But they didn't just count cards, they were also responsible for staying discreet. The big players, on the other hand, were the ones who placed the actual bets. They had to be skilled at blending into the casino environment. They didn't just walk up to the table and start betting large sums of money. No, they had to follow a pattern, sometimes betting small, sometimes betting big. This helped to avoid suspicion. If a big player always bet big, it would raise a red flag to the casino security. But by varying their bets, they kept their actions from being detected. To communicate with the big players, the counters used subtle signals. A flick of the wrist, a nod, or a glance. These simple gestures were their way of saying, "It's time." The big players, who were trained to recognize these signals, would then adjust their bets accordingly. This coordinated effort allowed the MIT team to have an edge over the casinos, even though they appeared to be regular gamblers. But as you can imagine, casinos are experts at detecting unusual behavior, and they were starting to catch on. Surveillance teams were scrutinizing the big players, watching for any unusual betting patterns. The MIT team knew they couldn't stay in one casino for too long, so they kept moving, changing locations, and staying under the radar. Still, the more they won, the more they drew attention. The team couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. Step 3. The rise to fame. Now, let's talk about how the MIT Blackjack Team became legends in the gambling world. As they traveled across the country, hitting different casinos and cities, their winnings began to snowball. At first, their success was just a small part of their plan, but as they started winning big money, they couldn't help but catch the attention of the casino industry. One of their star players, Samion, became a household name in the blackjack world. He had an almost unbelievable winning streak. There was one night when he walked away from the table with $75,000. One hand, one round, and that's what he made. The more they won, the more they attracted the attention of casino managers and security teams. Casinos started to notice that certain players were consistently winning large amounts of money in a short time. Samion's name started to circulate in the industry. He wasn't just any regular gambler anymore. He was the guy who was beating the house. But as they started to draw more attention, the stakes got higher. With large sums of money at risk, casinos began implementing more advanced security measures. Surveillance cameras, undercover agents, and even private investigators were hired to find out what was going on behind the scenes. It wasn't just about the money anymore. The MIT team had to stay ahead of the game, or risk losing everything. The real challenge came when casinos began profiling the players. They started watching for patterns: who was betting large amounts, who was acting suspicious, and when players were consistently on winning streaks. The MIT team realized they had to change their strategy. They could no longer bet the same way every time. They had to start varying their betting patterns to keep the casino security teams from catching on. They couldn't let their winnings draw too much attention. This was where the next phase of their plan came into play: moving constantly. Step 4. The tipping point. At this point, the MIT Blackjack Team had achieved what most would consider impossible. They had turned blackjack into a science. They had taken the odds and turned them in their favor, making millions of dollars from casinos. But even the most brilliant plans have their weaknesses, and the MIT team was starting to run out of room to maneuver. Despite their constant moving, their use of coded signals, and their careful variance in betting patterns, their success was drawing too much attention. At first, it was small-scale monitoring. Casino security had their suspicions, but didn't have concrete proof. The team could still operate smoothly, hopping from one casino to the next, raking in cash, and partying like rock stars. But as they continued to win, their success began to attract the notice of more than just security guards. Casinos were now hiring special investigators, people who didn't just follow suspicious players, but actively investigated their strategies. This was when things started to get serious. Enter Andy Anderson, a seasoned investigator hired by a major casino. Unlike the typical security guard, Andy wasn't just watching people. He was actively trying to figure out how they were cheating, or in the MIT team's case, how they were winning against the odds. Andy's job was to track high-stakes players, gather information, and develop profiles of anyone who seemed to be consistently winning. At first, Andy didn't know what he was looking for. He saw a group of young gamblers who seemed to be on a hot streak, but he didn't know if they were just lucky or if they had a system. However, after weeks of observation, the pieces started to fall into place. Andy realized that the MIT team wasn't just relying on luck. They were using advanced strategies, and this was where things took a turn for the worse. What Andy discovered would change everything for the MIT team. It wasn't just about card counting. It was a highly organized, team-based system that involved multiple players working in unison. The counters would keep track of the cards, and the big players would step in when the time was right to place huge bets. In essence, they were orchestrating a complex dance, and all Andy had to do was follow the rhythm. But here's the kicker. Andy didn't just gather information and report back. No, he learned their system, studied their betting patterns, and started tracing them across the casinos. He wasn't just investigating. They were now his target. He was on a mission to figure out who they were, how they were doing it, and, most importantly, to stop them before they made off with any more money. Step 5. The showdown. As the MIT team continued their winning streak, they grew more and more confident. They were on top of the world. They had millions of dollars, the perfect system, and a carefully crafted cover. But Andy Anderson was closing in on them. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about surviving the casino's pursuit. The team had no idea that someone was actively trying to stop them. They had spent so much time crafting their system, refining their signals, and staying one step ahead of the casino's surveillance systems that they didn't anticipate a direct human threat in the form of an investigator. Things started to heat up. The MIT students were feeling the pressure. They had made millions. But they had also started to realize that their days of easy wins were numbered. They could feel the heat from the casinos, and they were running out of time. So what did they do? Well, they kept doing what they knew best: adapting. They didn't panic. They didn't change their system overnight. Instead, they relied on their skills, their teamwork, and their ability to stay one step ahead. They had adapted before, so why not now? They didn't let Andy's investigation shake them. Instead, they doubled down, going to new cities, playing in different casinos, and spreading their operation across multiple locations. They tried to stay out of Andy's reach, but they knew that the longer they stayed in the game, the more likely it was that they'd get caught. Still, they were willing to risk it all because for them, this was about proving that they could outsmart the odds and win. Not just once, but again and again. But the inevitable finally happened. Andy, using his extensive surveillance, pieced together enough information to expose their methods. He had them. The team had become so successful that they couldn't hide their strategy any longer. The casinos were finally closing in on the MIT Blackjack Team, and their secret was no longer safe. It was only a matter of time before the operation would come to an end. The question now was, what would happen when the team was caught? Could they just walk away with their millions, or would they be forced to face the consequences? The fall. And then came the fateful moment. The team had been operating for a few years, making millions, living large, and getting closer and closer to being caught. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, but their success blinded them to the growing risks. Eventually, the casino's efforts to catch them paid off. Surveillance caught wind of the coordinated betting patterns. The team wasn't just a group of lucky players. They were a well-organized force. Casinos started blacklisting them. They were banned from casinos in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and other major gambling destinations. The MIT team's strategy had worked for a while, but the casino industry was far too powerful. As their success continued to draw attention, the cracks in their operation began to show. The investigators were onto them, and the casinos began to push back. Their days as top gamblers were coming to an end. The worst part? The team realized they couldn't go back to the casinos they had once frequented. They had outwitted the system, but now the system was coming for them. Their jackpot was becoming their downfall, and the once invincible team now faced a difficult choice. Get out while they still could, or keep playing and risk losing everything. The endgame, what happened to them? Despite their success, the MIT Blackjack Team ultimately had to disband. As the casino's attention grew more intense, they couldn't afford to keep playing. The risks were simply too high. The end came swiftly, and while they had millions of dollars in winnings, it was clear that their run had come to an end. So what happened to these brilliant students who had cracked the code of blackjack? Some of them faded into obscurity, while others used their winnings to fund successful careers in other fields. A few of them became famous in the world of gambling, but none of them ever returned to the tables. Their story serves as a cautionary tale. They had turned math and teamwork into a money-making machine, but it wasn't long before the casinos adapted and caught on. The MIT Blackjack Team's legacy lives on, but it serves as a reminder of how difficult it is to outsmart a system that's always evolving. Lessons from the MIT Blackjack Team. So, what can we learn from this incredible story of the MIT Blackjack Team? What insights can we take away from their brilliant and risky strategy? Smart strategy beats blind luck every time. The MIT team didn't rely on chance. They used their knowledge, their teamwork, and their mathematical understanding to manipulate the odds in their favor. Teamwork is everything. This wasn't about individual glory. It was about working together to achieve a common goal. Each person had a role, and when all the pieces fell into place, success was inevitable. Adaptation is key. When casinos started catching on, the MIT team didn't give up. They adapted, moved, and stayed one step ahead. The ability to adjust to changing circumstances was essential to their success. Know when to walk away. The temptation to keep playing is strong, especially when the money is flowing. But the MIT team knew when to exit the game before it was too late. Risk is inherent. Even the most brilliant systems can come crashing down. The MIT Blackjack Team gambled big, and ultimately, they paid the price for their success. But they also made millions along the way, proving that sometimes, taking a risk can pay off. The final word. If you've stuck with me this far, I hope you're walking away with a new appreciation for strategy, risk, and the power of clever thinking. The MIT Blackjack Team was a group of students who didn't just play blackjack. They redefined how the game was played. Their story is a masterclass in teamwork, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of success. If you enjoyed this wild ride and want to hear more incredible stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment. I've got more stories to share, and I promise you won't want to miss them. Thanks for sticking with me. If you enjoyed this, you might like this video too. Click it now, and I'll see you there.